We're back at Fallen Forest. Crypts are starting to melt. We need to get the CO2 going on this thing. So let's do a quick tutorial on how to set up the Aquarium Co-Op CO2 manifold in your aquarium. Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to set up the CO2 on Fallen Forest. We're going to do a quick walkthrough using the CO2 manifold provided by Aquarium Co-Op. Full disclosure, this is the entire manifold with the expandable regulator. The entire regulator with the expandable manifold has been provided to me by Aquarium Co-Op. So this is sponsored by Aquarium Co-Op. Just a heads up there, right? And then also the Neo diffuser that we're going to use inside this tank was also provided by Aquarium Co-Op. I'm not being paid for this. They don't get to see it ahead of time. This isn't a review. That'll come kind of in the long term. We've done an initial comparison, impression, call it what you will, against the CO2 Art Pro. That'll be up in the corner just in case you're interested. But let's show you how to set up everything you need to know with the CO2 regulator from Aquarium Co-op. It's super easy. We'll walk through the process and we'll get CO2 in this tank because, as you can see from some of the B-roll, crypts are melting, crypts are not happy, and CO2 is a fast way to do some upgrades. So let's get working on that manifold and that regulator. We're going to add the expandable manifold, set up the regulator, talk about adjusting the line pressure to get where you want, including what I like to use and kind of the settings I want to go with. So Aquarium Co-op makes this super easy. They include this little Allen wrench along with all these spare gaskets, and we're going to need this Allen wrench here to remove the existing manifold with this little Allen key, and we'll add on the new one. So first things first, you get our regulator here. And all we're going to do is remove using the Allen key. We're just going to loosen this up, remove the manifold, and we'll work from there. Okay, now that the screws are removed, carefully remove this. You'll see there's a little bit of a lubricant in there. What's important to note is if you look, see we've got a little gasket right there. So it's part of the replacement gaskets they include, is they have one more replacement for that. Now all we have to do is get our additional manifold. You can see it comes with instructions just in case. Pretty simple. We have additional screws. The manifold itself. And you can see it comes with another Allen key just in case you lost one from your original regulator. So similar to how we removed, right? We want the arrow pointing this way. So notice on the regulator, let me turn the solenoid to the side here. You have that arrow there. You want the arrow to going in the same direction. So we're going to attach like that. Use our Allen key, screw it back in. And just a suggestion when you're working on this, don't completely screw in one and then the other. Get them reasonably tight like you see here, and then finish tightening each screw. Don't completely screw in one screw, then move to the next. It's just a safety precaution, but it helps. And this is kind of a common thing with almost anything you're screwing together. Once we finish tightening this, I just want you to see, right? Sure a little bit. See that? Just, it's starting to get tight. You don't want to over tighten this. So as you see this, just kind of low, like barely a touch of a turn. You don't want it too tight. So now we have the first extra manifold installed. You can add additional manifolds from this point, but I'm only installing this one. So now you will always make sure that this is always the last manifold in the chain. So when it's complete, you'll have something that looks like this, right? The up is always the last manifold you install. So now we'll screw that bad boy in, and there you go. It's really that simple. Any of these expandable manifolds are all very similar in their design. Pretty easy peasy. Here's our CO2 tank. It's my spare one for when one runs out. And normally when you get a CO2 tank, you get a little washer like this that you would have go right here on the end between your regulator and the tank. However, Co-op has this lovely gasket built in. So because of this gasket being built in, we don't need that. Now the simple part here is you're just going to screw this on. Just going to lock the threads, start threading it. I'll hold my regulator as flat as possible so that it's easy to read. Now, some folks will use, and it usually does help, is to get a crescent wrench of some form to finish tightening this. As you can see, it's not fully tightened. And it can be a little troublesome to hand tighten, but if you got good hand strength and you're confident enough, you can hand tighten it in there and you'll be okay. Now, there's the basics. We've got it installed. Still a little loose, so we probably want to make sure we've got might need a crescent wrench. We'll find out in a minute, but that's it. Super simple to install this thing. From here, all we need to do is get power to the solenoid and get our line set up. Now for brief demonstration purposes, I've got this small piece of clear air line, just so that you can see what's going on here. So when we're installing our air line on something like this, what you're going to do is take the end of your air line and you're going to go through this thread piece first, like this, and then you'll install your air line or CO2 proof line, whichever you choose to use, over the barb here. Then you bring this down and screw it in to tighten. Right? Very simple. Go ahead and set it slide in. There we go. And that, again, just lightly hand tight. You don't need to over torque this. It's going to hold your line in place. Right? Nice and simple. From here, we just get power to our solenoid. We start moving air, and we're good to go. Now, as far as monitoring your bubble count, you're going to open this here. So that you can pour fluid in here. You have two options. You can either use water, or my personal favorite, and I got this tip from my buddy Joel, food grade mineral oil. Easily available on Amazon. And then all I do with this is really simple. I get a clean pipette. Again, I buy these by, I think it's like that 200 pack off Amazon. Then all I'm going to do is get a little bit of the mineral oil. And you don't need to fill this very far. But we use the pipette just because it helps fill accurately. You don't want to fill much more than about this. A little less than halfway or halfway on the nose. And I don't know how well you can see that, but any of the excess we're going to get rid of. Why mineral oil? It's really simple. Mineral oil is very similar in viscosity to water. The only difference is we're not likely to deal with evaporation in mineral oil. So we'll constantly have this and we only really have to fill it once. Now if you push your air too hard or you fill your mineral oil up too high, there is a chance it'll start pushing mineral oil into the line. A little bit in your tank is not going to hurt you, but that's where we want to keep it low. We want to minimize the likelihood of mineral oil coming up and into our air line. I'm going to go ahead and fill this other one, and then we'll check back in. One heads up. Sometimes these top parts can be on really tight. Don't be afraid to remove the entire bubble counter down here in order to get better torque to take this off. And then screw it back on, fill this, and you're good to go. after you have these filled and you're done with this pipette, make sure you don't use this for anything else. You just don't want to risk mixing even this slight amount of mineral oil in with your tank. Because if you're doing medicines or something like that, you just don't want it to happen. I buy them to be disposable, so when I'm done with them, I throw them away. Then all you have to do is recap, install your airline, and you're ready to go. Now that we've got power, we can start by opening the gas here. You might hear a little hiss, might not. You usually don't want to hear a hiss. And then we can adjust our line pressure here. So you'll notice if we go clockwise, we're going to increase pressure. And I want to be somewhere between about 30 and 35 or so. You might hear little hisses as it kind of depressurizes. And somewhere right around here is pretty much perfect. We can go a little bit lighter. And then from here, we can adjust here. Now, when you're setting this up initially, make sure, number one, these are tightened all the way. So that would be rotating to your right. Because otherwise, if you do have some mineral oil in here, you might do what I did, forget that you don't have it tightened all the way, and spray some mineral oil and cover the whole top of this thing, and need to clean it up. So, now I'm going to get an airline here. All right, now that we have our line installed, along with the diffuser, all we have to do is open this valve up, and we'll start getting some CO2. Hold on. Reaching around the camera is fun. Now, one thing we want to do when we start this is sit here for a second, and we're going to fiddle with it. We'll go a little bit higher on our CO2 to start. What we want to do is let the pressure equalize itself. And you'll notice now that I've opened it up, the pressure here has come down quite a bit, right? So now we're only at 25. We'll want a little bit more pressure in order to make sure that we're doing well by this line. And that's why I say this is kind of a careful process. There we go, that's about where we were before. We do get a little uptake in the bubbles. So now we would come back over here. We can adjust it if we want more or if we want less. The nice thing, again, with the Co-op, because there's so much tension in these, you can do finer tuning adjustments when you're not working around a camera. This puts us right around 3 or 4 bubbles a second, but what we want to do is stay here and watch for a few minutes, make sure that the pressure equalizes and the bubble count stays where we want it to be. We got plenty of gas in this tank. It's a brand new tank. So now we just need to wait. And as long as this line pressure stays where we want it to be, and our rough bubbles per second are where we want them to be, this has gone down a little bit, so I'm probably going to increase more, but basically we can fine tune between here and here, and as we open up more, like if we open up another one, we might have to add more pressure here and slowly balance all these things out. But for right now, for what we want, maybe a little bit faster CO2, but that's going to start filling our line and going up into our tank. When you have everything dialed in, you can confirm against the mini diffuser here because it has its own kind of built-in bubble counter. So as long as the bubblage that you have here is where you want it to be, you're good. There you go. There's a quick walkthrough. CO2 is going on this tank. You'll notice that there's a little Hydor Coralia circulation pump right now just because I want to push the CO2 around inside this tank and help some of these plants convert. All these are potted plants, so while the conversion process was started from when I purchased them, they weren't fully converted, which is why we're dealing with a bit of melt, especially in the crypts. Crypts are notorious for this. Often when you're buying crypts potted, you're just buying the root structure, and we're going to let the plant regrow. So let's talk about what we're doing from here on out. The rough CO2 on this tank is going to be about 3 to 4 bubbles a second, somewhere in that range. Now, you might think, that's a lot of CO2, but if you account for the fact that this is a 40-gallon tank, it's not really that much CO2. So in the end, this would be the same as if on your 10-gallon tank you were doing about 1 bubble per second. Not a ton. And because these are low-demand plants, we don't need to really push some serious high levels of CO2 in this tank. We could, but it's really unnecessary. Now for fertilizers. At first, we're just going to start with kind of my go-to, Easy Green, for a little bit. However, relatively soon we're going to change our fertilizer. So we're just going to use the Easy Green early because that's what I have. But I have a fertilizer I'm going to be doing some test work on as I elbow the tank beside me. Whoops. Anyway, so we're going to use that fertilizer in combination with the CO2 here, and over time we'll try a couple of different things. You will notice, if you saw some of the B-roll, there's some rocks holding wood down. A couple pieces of wood were a little floaty and not quite as dense as some of the others, so they're there temporarily until everything decides to hunker down, probably another week or two. And then there is some, like, the fungus. It's not actually fungus, but that kind of white stuff that comes out of the wood is coming out of some of the wood, so that stuff's amazing for things like shrimp, snails, and baby plecos. It's not something to be scared of. Don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. Don't freak out. It's okay. Part of nature. This is what happens. And then let's talk about kind of long-term. You guys spoke in kind of a resounding quantity in the comments in the previous video after we showed the planning of Fallen Forest that that sponge filter's got to go. We need something a little more hidden and not as obvious and ugly in the tank. I think what we'll do, just because we are going with an aquascape, is use a canister. Normally, I would be a little more amped to use something like a, hang on back or something like that, but we'll use a canister just because this is kind of a nice thing that my wife has put together with me, so I want to make it super nice for all of us to enjoy here in the house and make this kind of a pretty aquascape tank. Certainly not to, like, the crazy ADA levels, but nonetheless, our pretty aquascape tank. We'll reveal that filter in another video. But trust me, I think you're going to be interested in it. And then from here, it's just a matter of letting this tank settle down, monitoring all the parameters, letting some of those plants settle in, regrow for some of the stuff that's melting and get established, and then we'll start adding fish. So this will probably be the last video on Fallen Forest for a little bit until we do just the filter that's going to go on this tank, but I think that's going to take like 2 weeks or so to get here. I'm ordering it literally the day I'm filming this. But once that comes in, we'll get it set up, we'll talk about it, why we made that choice, and then beyond that, the only other thing is like what the fertilizer we're using. We'll talk about that fertilizer at the same time. So that concludes Fallen Forest. What's coming next? We are going to do an update with brother-in-law James's tank. We've got some stuff that we're fighting in there that I think a lot of beginning aquarists are likely to encounter. So we're going to have a talk with brother-in-law James, go over the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to his experiences with his tank so far, and what we're doing next. And then we got another open space for another 40-gallon breeder right here down beside me. I think it's time to set up the second tank. So that's what you have to look forward to. Let me know in the comments down below. Is there anything you think I missed when it comes to setting up this CO2? Questions you may have, whatever it may be. Maybe it's a comment like, hey, I really think you should add X plant in the background when you get rid of that ugly old sponge, or something along those lines. I think I'm going to add a couple of extra plants that I've got kind of stashed around my fish room. Make it a little bit of a surprise when we install that canister, where something would just all of a sudden show up. But until then, we've got a circulation pump and a sponge. They're going to do our starter filtration, establish our colony. We're not really worried about filtration. We don't have plants, or we don't have fish in there, right? We just have plants. But just establishing water movement, oxygenation, and things like that until we have the final filter in place. And then we're going to set up the test tank down here, and we're going to do some hardcore testing in a 40-gallon breeder that I think you guys are going to enjoy. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a little like, share it. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. You'll see more. You can check out all the previous stuff on Fallen Forest up in the corner right now. And as always, gang, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome.